Very good evening to all of you. On behalf of Committee for Members in Practice of Institute of Chartered Accountant of India, I welcome you all in this virtual CP meeting on AQMM Audit Quality Maturity Model and Audit Documentation. Both the topics are apt one, real, very important one in these days. And in order to tackle these two topics, we are having eminent speakers from our Chartered Accountant fraternity, CA Sandeep Sharma ji and CA Rajiv Saxena ji. I welcome on behalf of CMP of ICI both these speakers. Welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So first of all, we will take first session that is on audit quality maturity model AQMM. For this, we are having with us CA Sandeep Sharma ji. It is my proud privilege to share with you the brief profile of CA Sandeep Sharma ji. Sandeep Sharma ji is a member of Institute of Chartered Accountant of India and a partner in SR Botley and Company LLP for last 10 years. He has completed his BCom honors from Shri Ram College of Commerce, Delhi University, and is also a cost accountant. He has having audit experience of more than 25 years, leading financial audits, accounting advisory work, and having international gap reviews. His cross-border engagements and capital market transactions. His role involves audit quality function for his firm. Sandeep ji is a member of Assurance and Audit Standard Board since 2016 of Institute of Chartered Accountant of India. So list is vast. So without wasting much more time, I request Sandeep ji to start his deliberation and enlighten all of us on audit quality maturity model. Sandeep ji.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this important topic. What I will do, I will share my screen with the presentation, and then as the slide go by, I will delve into details of the AQMM model.
Fine, sir.
Hope the presentation is visible. Okay, so the agenda I will cover is the background of what do we mean by audit quality and what was the need of this AQMM model. And the large part of the presentation will be around the contents of AQMM. And then I will wind up with how the maturity rating of the firm is proposed to be calculated and what are the suggestion way forward for my fellow colleagues. So if we start with the audit quality, in simple words, it is nothing but quality of the audit process, which results in compliance of auditing standards and other requirements while performing audit processes and meeting stakeholders' expectation. But in reality, we can interpret and define audit quality with multiple models. And in the past, there have been number of attempts to define define audit quality, but there's no single definition which has resulted in universal recognition or acceptance of this term. And this is because audit quality is a complex and often multifaceted concept and may involve input, output, and system and processes. Input in the sense auditing standard, ethical standard, and other professional standards. Output of audit quality is auditor's report or the communication by auditors, which may be communication with those charged with governance and other communications. Systems and processes remain integral to the audit quality because this is the link between inputs and output. It also depends on who is perceiving the meaning of the audit quality, whether this is investor, because investor is more concerned with auditor reporting, reputation of the auditor, and expectation of audit. Investor might have different expectations. It also depends whether the recipient is audit committee member, because AC member will be more interested in assessment of quality of an auditor, assessment of quality of the audit process, and the auditor communication and interaction. If the recipient is government or any regulator will have a different expectation of the audit quality. So all in all, audit quality is impacted by experience of the auditor, technical knowledge, systems and processes, and the quality of resources in an audit firm. Then audit quality is gauged at two levels, one at the engagement level and another at firm level. When we say audit quality is gauged at an engagement level, it means what is the compliance with audit standards and laws and regulations, what is the level of documentation, the supervision review of the audit engagement, and the quality of the reporting. At the firm level, this is more of what is done at the top, what is vision of the audit firm, how are the systems, what is the investment in people and processes by the audit firm, and what are the results of inspection both internally and externally. Now, with this definition, there is a need for benchmarking. This is because we understand auditing standards are principles based, where the guidance is given and the detailed audit procedures are not prescribed, but instead are designed by the professional as per the requirement of the situation. Maybe this is a listed company or unlisted company, and maybe this is a different industry. So this is subject to professional judgment of the auditor. So when the users of audit reports, which includes investors and regulators, they have little transparency into the nature and extent of procedure or system and processes of the independent auditor. What they have only is the outcome, which is the audit report, nothing beyond that. So far, external inspection was the only visible indicator of the audit quality systems or processes of auditor. While there was a need for benchmarking auditors on a range of matters impacting the audit quality. In this direction, ICI through Center for Audit Quality has come up with AQMM version 1.0 because this is the first version of the audit quality maturity model. This is in place from July 1 this year and will remain in place till next year for 1 year. And this is recommendatory at this moment. The firms which are expected to use AQMM are the firms which are auditing a listed entity or a bank other than cooperative bank or any insurance company. However, there is a clarification. If the firm is doing audit of only branch audits, then that firm may not be required to follow AQMM. At the end of the day, while this is recommendatory, while this is not applicable to all the firms, uh, this is a good tool to benchmark amongst the audit firms. And in case audit firm wants to showcase its maturity, I would recommend to my colleagues to use this model. So AQMM is nothing but a questionnaire that enables firms to rate their current level of audit maturity. The firms can self-identify areas where they are stronger in some of the areas. In case they are lacking in few areas, then they can always develop a roadmap on how to achieve a higher level of audit maturity. The AQMM is organized into three sections. First is practice management on operation. Second is human resource management. And third is practice management, which is strategic or functional. In all, there are a total of 800 points, 600 points, which are scattered through these three sections. And I will come to how the maturity rating will be measured. So out of 600, 280 or the largest points are in first area, which is in practice management operations. While these are the constituent practice area of the firm, workflow practice manual, quality review manuals, audit tool, I would encourage my colleagues to read to the AKMM on some of these areas. But what is relevant in all these areas is now what is expected is not only we should have the processes around these areas in place, we should also have the documented policies or procedures or the quality control. And beyond documentation, it is also expected that the member firms or auditors or practitioners should continuously monitor the level of processes that they have within their firm or the sole proprietorship. And they should continuously assess how to upgrade in terms of getting more points and thus visibly uh, coming up to the ranks in terms of maturity. Just for one example, let's say workflow practice manual. 8 points out of 16 points is for presence of audit manuals containing the firm's methodology that ensures compliance with auditing standards and implementation thereof. Now, we have auditing standard, we have guidance note, and we have other pronouncement by institute. An auditor may work solely based on these professional standards and guidance note and technical guides and implementation guide. The auditor may also use audit manuals which give detailed procedures section wise on planning, on conclusion, how to do execution, on revenue or pp or creators and so on. It is expected that if there is a audit manual, then the firm will get 8 points. If there is no documented practice manual, then there will not be any point. Other 8 points are reserved for availability of standard formats relevant for audit quality like LOE, a letter of engagement, which is governed by SA 210, representation letter by management, format of significant work papers, and standard reports. Now, if a firm which has standard formats is more likely to be consistent in using these formats in the audit quality and also in the audit report. A firm which does not have these formats may have different format, may use a different engagement letter, and they therefore will not be consistent. So the idea is to be consistent in the audit approach, and thus the firm which displays that they are more consistent will be considered as more mature in terms of their level. Quality control for engagement is the largest portion of this 280, coming 80 out of 280. And there are different questions. For example, does the firm have a partner review or EQCR for all audit assignments which are applicable? And is there a document of time spent for review of all engagements? So if the firm has a protocol having partner review for all the engagement, which is required as per auditing standard, by the way, and if the firm, as per SQC1, is nominating a quality review for certain engagement based on certain parameters set up by the firm, and there is a tracking of the time spent for these reviews, the firm will be considered more mature than other firms, and 8 points are devoted for this. And if the firm has number of engagements without finding by ICI or ICI committee or regulator that requires improvements, it will be rated higher than the firm which have such engagements. And the points range from 4 point to 20 point, depending how many such engagement meet the threshold of expectation by the regulators. Another important aspect, if the firm is documenting its policies as in accordance with SQC1, and the keyword is documenting, then the firm will get 12 points. So it's not only documenting the policy, it is also to take care of the monitoring process of these policies. Expectation is the quality control processes and procedures should be relevant, adequate, and should be operating effectively throughout the life cycle of the audit. Does the firm has, now any firm will have accounting auditing resources. The question is, does the firm has accounting and auditing resources in the form of soft copies of archives, Q&As, or firm thought leadership, or dedicated sharing technical desk? Because that firm is expected to be more mature in its conduct, to have universal access to its members, whether interns or managers or the partners, who can access all these resources seamlessly and consistently. So 8 points are reserved out of 80 points for that thing. Then it is expected that the firm will follow standard delivery methodology in terms of audit manuals, whether that has been adhered or not. And again, there are some points which are negative points actually are reserved for the number of statutory audit engagement that have been reworked. Can be filing errors, can be reissuance of audit report, can be restatement. So all these questions are carrying certain points. Another, if I take more examples, one is the technology adoption, 64 point, the second highest in this category, which includes whether the firm has technology adoption at office, which includes internal communication or chats, This is because technology is backbone of any industry, and today with many practitioners or auditors working from home or working remotely today, and with clients also working remotely in few cases still, it is more than ever. Technology is important. So what is prescribed is you can use Skype or Microsoft Teams or Zoom or BlueJeans. Uh, but the social media like Google Talk or MSN Messenger, LinkedIn Messenger, these are something which are not uh, required or appreciated. So has the firm automated its office with automated attendance system and leave management? Is the firm using activity management or timesheet management? Is the firm using digital storage of records? Because if the firm is using digital storage of records like scanning, etc., it will have easy access to the records, long-term storage with lower cost. Is the firm using centralized server or cloud? Is the firm using video conferencing facilities, which impacts traveling, lesser the traveling, lesser the time, and lesser the money? Is the firm using only licensed operating system or software? Again, 4 points are devoted to that. It is because all people are expected to have only the original software and the latest version to avoid any hacking or other misuse of the information. Another 4 points are devoted to whether the firm has own email domains or email usage policies, use of antivirus, data security, and cyber security. So all these measures are basically technology adoption of a firm. The firm which is more advanced in its conduct is expected to be more technology advanced and using these resources in the audit or maybe as part of its governance. Revenue budgeting and pricing is a significant impact, and expected is that the firm will track and together with service delivery will track how many hours or days are going into an engagement, how the fees is being determined, whether this is being determined or on the planned hours or planned time. Is the firm has enough or adequate tracking mechanism to track the time which is spent on an engagement? If there are, let's say, as an example, firm estimated 600 hours and the firm has ended up using 800 hours, is the firm using budget versus actual tracking? In this case, 200 more spent. Is the firm using analysis? If this is the time which is additional because of certain issues in the audit which are not anticipated, or maybe because client not ready, is the firm taking steps for recovering additional amounts of fees from the client as overrun, because this was the betterment of the practitioner? So all this is counted. One more thing in service delivery, whether the firm is taking effort of sensitizing the clients in what are the latest auditing pronouncement, the requirements in regulation. Is the firm dealing with the client on timely basis? Is the firm timing as the partner and the team spending time with those charged with governance, for example, board of directors or audit committee? Are they enriching them with enough knowledge? These are the points which matter when we talk about operations part of the practice management. Moving on to the next area, which is human resources management, 240 out of 600 is very significant. And we all know in the audit profession, the most important resource that we have is our people. It is expected that the firm which has sufficient number of people and qualitative people will display higher quality and higher maturity than the firm which has lesser resources, a deficit of resources, and maybe less experienced people. Because audit is all about using the wisdom, using experience, and using professional skepticism in performing the audits. So first part is whether the firm has a process of employee or resource planning for the engagement based on skill set requirement. So what do we assess is the level of people who are available: chartered accountant, non-chartered accountant, senior or junior. What is the skill set? Does the firm has adequate skill set in terms of audit or tax or industry knowledge for the type of clients that it has? Is the firm using tools for the resource allocation, maybe spreadsheet, maybe workflow tools, maybe Microsoft tools in allocating the people? Is the firm using the monitoring or tracking such allocation of people? And what is the ratio of staff to partner ratio, partner to manager ratio? All these are being tracked in resource planning. And whether the firm documents the resource plan for each engagement and file it for reference during the engagement. So it is not only that we track the resource plan, we also have to document the resource plan and file it as part of the documents for reference during the engagement. Second part is very key in these days. How does the firm train its people and develop its people? So training is not only technical, which is what are the changes in accounting standard, auditing standards, or other pronouncement. It is also to do with soft skills or managerial skills. What is the firm? How is the firm training its people in, let's say, business etiquettes or behavioral aspects, or training the potential manager partner in how to lead people? One of the benchmark is number of professional development hours or days spent as a firm per employee. The auditors can use ICAI CPE program or may have its own in-house or maybe outsourced program. The requirement is they should track and record attendance in these programs, whether through CPE program or their own program. And there are 24 points depending, 60 hours per year for junior level, and 30 to 60 hours for mid-level, and more than 30 hours for partners. Separate points for general training and specialized technical training. Next is whether the employees are equipped with technological skills, artificial intelligence, blockchain, audit and data analytical tools, and the scoring is for usage. So as part of firm vision, I would say training willingness to, it should be, people should be trained in terms of the willingness to embrace technology. Today more and more industries are going technical, using IT, advanced software as a service, and computer as a service also. We should not be left behind in terms of our own knowledge about the IT system, so that we are effectively able to audit the entities which are highly tech savvy. Another point is whether the firm has a performance management culture that rewards high performing employees and those with who demonstrate high levels of quality and ethics. So idea is to capture the information, selection of the high performing employees, and rewarding not only in terms of monetary terms, but appreciation of the people, recognition of their performance and also promoting the people. Then we come to resources turnover and compensation management, which is essentially, does the firm has any target of how many people will be retained? Because in this industry, there may be case of people moving out of the firm due to different reasons, maybe better opportunities, maybe they were not treated well, any of the reasons. So there can be attrition in the people. So what was the target, and what is the actual, and what is the firm doing in terms of retaining its people? Uh, we have seen as over a number of years that best people are always the people who are trained with the firm and who are retained at a with the firm. So maybe promoting the people, giving higher compensation, giving more rewarding uh, work to them is something the firms can do to retain the talent. And other 8 points are: what is the statutory contribution, wherever applicable, health insurance, other benefits which are available in the firm for staff members and partners? Does the firm evaluate, or for which kind of audit does it have a revolving door? Revolving door is basically people joining and leaving organization quickly. So there might be an audit which is in very remote area where the audit is considered as punishment posting by the employees. Maybe the firm should see which are the engagement due to which people are leaving and taking care of that issue. Then what is the progress of people through an established framework and time commitment of management partners? Identify criteria for performance evaluation. Performance evaluation can be on technical skills, on communication skills, client relationships, leadership, time management, quality. How good or bad is the coaching and mentoring program investment in the employees, especially for women colleagues, to enhance the diversity of audit leadership in the profession? Are there any special policies by the firm to provide people time to rejuvenate, especially after busy audit seasons? Maybe time off after a hectic schedule. Immediately if tax audit season finishes, the firm can consider giving 2 days off to its employees for them to recuperate and come back as a fresh energy. Is there any established mechanism to listen to people and their views and suggestions? So credible employee survey, and what is the outcome? So what the firm can do, it can launch employee survey, physical or online. It can use town hall concept where the leader of the firm addresses all the employees in a large room or in the open area, as the case may be, or maybe online on a Zoom call or other online media, and listen to what people have to say and then act in a transparent manner. Because transparency is something which leads to more trust in the leadership of the firm. And again, what are the standards of recruiting people? Assessment methodology, evaluation of quality, and fitment to the job and culture. Wherever this is documented and also executed, the monitoring should be there, and these evidences contribute to these points. Qualification skill set is basically number of professionally qualified members, ACA or FCA. What is the percentage of employees with necessary qualification skill sets? And the next section is also if the people have additional qualification experience like CISA or DISA or IP, whether all partners are compliant with ICS CPE policy. There should be tracking mechanisms to do that. And there can be members with specialization courses, certification, for example, diploma in IFRS, or the firm's internal Ind AS or IFRS accreditation requirements. In terms of performance evaluation, does the firm has written KPIs for performance evaluation of the firm and partners? It should be written. That's the keyword. Then what is the method for measurement evaluation of these written KPIs? Because KPI not only should be written, it should be measurable also. And the last thing is, what is the frequency and consistency of assessing these key performance indicators of the employees? Moving on to the third and the last section of the AQMM, it is the strategic or functional part of the practice management. So it starts with, does the firm has a balanced mix of experience and new assurance partners? Is the firm compliant with ICAI Code of Ethics and other regulatory requirements? In terms of infrastructure, the criteria is what are the number of branches and associate and network firms and affiliates. So it is based on number. The more the branches, the more there are point. And the split is up to 3, 4 to 7, 8 to 15, and more than 15. So the auditors can include the branches of its associate and network firms and affiliates also. And all these things should be documented and evidenced. Then requirement is, are branch level activities centralized or decentralized in accounting, invoicing, and payroll processing? Because there's a benefit to the firm if they are centralizing the operations. Is the physical and logical security of information are extended and implemented across location? Physical can be things like security guards or CCTV access control or locks. Logical can be password using PIN and biometrics. Is the infrastructure adequate in terms of internet or internet network bandwidth? Because most of the work is now not through writing, but using laptops or computers or machines. So is the firm has adequate structure for internet or internet network? Because more are the users, increase is the requirement of the bandwidth as we are using more and more using of technology. Credentials is the firm ICI peer review certified? It itself shows a maturity because any firm which is peer review certified has the valid peer review certificate would have gone through inspection of its engagement as well as the firm's SQC uh, policies and how they are documenting, how they are meeting the requirements of SQC. That has already gone with the process. Is the firm engaged with RBI and CNDG? And is there an advisory as well as a decision to not allot work due to unsatisfactory performance by the CAG office? The negative points for that. Then, is the firm debarred or blacklisted by any government authorities based on the performance of the firm? It carries negative points. Is there any negative assessment in the report of the QRB? This is significant because many firms are getting inspected by QRB, at least on the unlisted entities which are not covered by NAFRA. And has there been a case of professional misconduct on the part of the member of firm where he has been proved guilty? Again, negative points. So all in all, there are 3 areas constitute 600 points. Now, there are 4 level of maturity which ICA has suggested. Up to 25% in each section is level 1, which is the lowest level, which is the nascent stage. Next level is 2. Some progress in terms of audit quality has been made. Level 3 is fairly mature, substantial progress, but still not yet there. Level 4 is when the firm has at least 75% in each of the sections. The keyword is each of the sections. Then the indicator is there is significant adoption of standards and procedures, and the firm should continue to reach to the 100% level because that is the pinnacle. Now, how should we do it? It is easier said than done. How do we do it? So maybe you can start with benchmarking yourself against the expectation of AQMM. So you can section by section do some introspection and see where are you currently in terms of expectation by AQMM, whether you have sufficient resources, whether policies are being documented, whether there are issues or regulatory issues against the firm or the partners, or whether the firm has spent enough on the technology adoption, what are its performance measurement plans, what is the documentation level for these, and how are these monitored and the results of that. So do an honest introspection and you will come to either 2 of the things: either you meet the requirement or you don't meet the requirement, in which case you should go and see what you can do, which is the second part: planning initiatives. Convert the initiative to be taken into an action plan with timelines. It can be monthly or quarterly or annual interval. You keep on benchmark yourself. Then you identify the resources. Resources can be a number of people. Resources can be amount to be spent on technology adoption or other things. And there should be a definite execution plan. How will you go about improving your score in each of the areas? And then you keep on re-evaluating against the DCMM and revisit the execution plan, maybe quarterly or half yearly. And if required, you can also consider an external firm to do the peer review, especially in case of sole proprietorship or a small firm. If you think you don't have resources within the firm to give an to assess properly, or if you think you are reaching that level but not sure if the outsider how the outsider will be reviewing, because it is expected that way forward when this becomes mandatory, as and when, because council will take a decision next year, there may be a case of peer review board coming in and checking as part of its peer review process, or maybe some other process on these points. And why this is important? This is important because of number of reasons. It is not only to benchmark one firm from another, but practically there may be a case of audit committee of listed company asking the firm how it is ranked in terms of it is a level 1 firm, level 2, or level 3 firms. I'm not saying this is a marketing tool, because we are prohibited from using the result of this assessment in any of our website or anywhere to advertise ourselves. But if the management ask for our assessment, self-assessment, or later on assessment by a regulator or third party, then we should be ready. So I would advise people to start assessing as soon as possible without waiting for next year, so that there is still a time where people can fill the gaps, if there are any gaps, and start working on the direction to move upward the rank from level 1 to level 2 to level 3 to level 4. That's the ideal situation. If there is any question, then I can respond to it.
Thank you so much, sir. Till now, there is no question due to the, I hope, maybe due to the technical glitch, questions are not coming. We are trying to find out the solution. So till now, we haven't received any question. So thank you very much for the wonderful deliberation, sir. We have gained a lot through your deliberation. And now we are having with us another guest speaker, Sir Rajiv Saxena ji. So it is again my proud privilege to share with the brief profile, with all of you, the brief profile of Rajiv Saxena ji. Rajiv ji is a chartered accountant and a partner with S.N. Bartleby and Company LLP. Over his 24 years of career, Rajiv has handled and advised on numerous engagements on matter relating to the statutory audit as per Indian GAAP and Ind AS and tax audit as per Indian regulations, project management, project implementation, financed under USAID, audit as per AI IFRS as well as US GAAP. Rajiv sir has experience in international assignments, including development projects, audits conducted for European Commission, audit of World Bank, aided projects, and has exposure to due diligence and business valuation engagements. He has been a member of FRRB subgroup New Delhi 2 in 2018 and 19. He is presently a member of various ICA study groups for SQM1 and SQM2 and SA220, and list is again very wide to elaborate. So without wasting much more time, may I request Rajiv ji to please enlighten us, all of us, on audit documentation. Rajiv sir.
Thank you so much, Anilji. Just a small correction. The name of the firm is S.N. Dhawan and Company, LLP.
Okay, sorry. S.N. Dhawan and Company LLP. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. And I will share my screen with the professional colleagues.
Yes, sir. Please, sir. Yes, sir. It is visible, sir.
Okay. So I think this is the right opportunity to talk about documentation, because my professional colleague Sandeep, who has deliberated on audit quality maturity model, actually for that to be able to meet the expectation of that model and to score to the expected level, I think audit documentation is the backbone. And so this is the right opportunity to discuss that. And at the same time, I would like to confess that audit documentation is such a wide subject that it can take anything between 1 hour to the whole day. So I will, in the interest of time, though my presentation is quite long, but I still want to cover and would like to cover some of the key aspects with the professional colleague, which most of you are already aware. But why these are important and becoming important in the current environment, I think I would like to take you through. So the agenda is like this, which is looking a little longer. I will see how I manage this agenda. And thanks to Sandeep, he has given me extra 10 minutes, which will help me to cover this agenda. Briefly, the introduction about audit documentation, why audit documentation is important, we all know, but we will further deliberate together. Factor determining form and content of documentation, stages of documentation, key essentials, documentation requirement from respective standards in auditing, essays. We will talk about some of the key ones, though there is a long list here. Documentation requirement as per SQC1, which is due to be changed, as we all know. Ownership and custody and retention of documentation, what are the regulations around that? Proposed changes to SQC1 and ISQC1 with the new standard ISQM1 and ISQM2. And the regulator specific requirement coming from SEBI or IRDA or RBI. Changes in documentation practices due to current environment, which we are all going through, the pandemic. And learning from mistakes. So I have covered some of the findings from one of the ICI report on general observations on lack of documentation and the reviews which they have conducted. So this is general observation out of the review which they have performed. Nothing is specific to any firm. And then international practices, where the audit word globally is heading to, and how we have to pick it up. And a quick recap, and then view checks. I understand technology today would not help me to get your live answers, so I will use this opportunity to take you through some questions which I have framed basis the coverage and content of this presentation or the deliberation today, and then I would also share the specific answers for those questions or those view checks. So if I talk about introduction, so this I have picked up from the peer review manual, which is the key document against which the firms are evaluated in terms of their quality on audit. So these are fundamental questions, if I can share with you. And these questions are not only related to while you are executing the audit, but these questions or these documentation are important while the post completion of the audit, and then probably during a quality review, which is performed much later. So the documentation which is covered in current webinar or current session is not is covering up the documentation at the stage of planning, then execution, then completion, then archival, retention, and as well as retrieval of audit documentation. So this is the entire coverage, and the diagram in front of you, which has certain questions with the what, where, and which, and this is the premise of the documentation. If you are able to answer these questions with the substantiation or with the relevant document and the work paper, then I think you have achieved the expectation of the documentation actually. And the very premise of the documentation is that when the review is performed or any subsequent analysis of perform how the audit was completed and the opinion was issued, the documentation or document or work paper should be self-speaking. It should not be the case that one has to sit with the reviewer to demonstrate or to explain. It should be self-speaking, and that's why these questions are important. Who has done it? Why it has been done? What has been performed? Where it has been performed? Which documents are supporting the conclusion which have been drawn? How that conclusions or completion have been documented. So if we are able to answer these questions, then probably we have achieved our objective. And this essay through 230 defines the audit documentation, but which in normal parlance is known as working papers or work papers, which we are all familiar with. So why is audit documentation important? This again is coming from the peer review manual, because that is the Bible. So the key aspects of audit documentation are so result in better conceptual clarity, help avoid misconception. If you have documented well, then you don't have to be in a situation where there can be some misconception, supports and evidence work performed, compliance with the standards, then assist in QCR, which is the quality control review, create accountability, assist external inspection like peer review, quality review board, and probably NAFRA, evidence of audit planning, assist engagement team, record significant matters, and evidence of basis for conclusion. So if you have a documentation well created, then these questions and these steps can be easily addressed. What are the factors which determine and what are the contents of documentation? So this again has been extracted from our peer review manual, which is a very well documented reference material. So size of the firm and the number of offices, degree of authority both personnel and offices have, nature and complexity of the firm's practice and organization, records maintained by the clients, whether it is manual or automated, IT environment, and things like that. So accordingly, you have to bring in the experts to deal with that kind of situation. And internal controls and operation. So whether the company has a robust internal control environment, can you place reliance on that? And if you place reliance, what will be the level of reliance? It will be moderate or high. So all those decision making have to be demonstrated through the documentation which you have created during the audit. So these are the stages of documentation, again coming from the peer review manual. So first and foremost is the understanding the entity, then time and cost budgets, because as I think Sandeep also mentioned, is one of the factor of the audit maturity model. How do you monitor the progress and the performance of your employee and the completion of audit and time, and as per the timelines and stuff like that. So time and budget, how do you monitor that? How you track that? Audit program, risk assessment, communication with those charged with governance, conclusion, then working papers, then completion, and then manager or review point actually. So partner review point. So this is how we complete the documentation in an audit cycle. Then what are the key essentials of documentation? This again is a very interesting diagrammatic representation of how do we complete a work paper. So name of the client is the key and the foremost information, period covered by the audit, subject matter, whether it is statutory audit or what is the topic or what is the financial item which is covered by that document, file reference, then initials of the member of the audit team who have prepared it and the date on which it was prepared. So this will help you to answer some of the questions which you saw on the first slide: where, why, whom, what, how it has been done, which are the documents which has been used to arrive at the conclusion. Then initials of the member of the audit team who reviewed the working paper, complete lead schedules, working paper to agree with the books of accounts, financials, and our cross-reference. I think this is very important. Many a times it has been observed that while the audit is completed, but there is a review comment in the work paper which has not been closed, and that remains like that. And when the review happens, then probably we are in a difficult position to explain that how that review, even if that review point was closed, but if we have not removed that review comment and have substantiated by the explanation, then probably we may be in trouble in front of a reviewer actually. So, and then last but not the least is audit summary memorandum, which helps you to substantiate or support the audit conclusion, that how the audit conclusion has been arrived. So this audit summary memorandum is a very useful document to support your conclusion. Section 6 is about documentation requirements for respective standards in auditing. So the list is vast, but some of the key ones: SA 200, which is of the overall objective of the independent auditors and the conduct of an audit in accordance with SA, relevant papers collection, and then SA 220, 210 is about agreeing the terms of audit engagement. So engagement letter is the supporting document for that. Then 220 is our quality control of an audit of financial statement, then quality control policies and procedure, which are implemented by the audit firms, audit plans, personnel, etc. 230 is about audit documentation. This is the key one, which includes audit program, analysis, memoranda issues or issues memorandum, summaries of significant matters, letters of confirmation and representation, checklists, which can include a checklist for Companies Act and various other compliances, and CARO and things like that. Correspondence, including email concerning significant matters. I think in the present environment, correspondence through email becomes the key, and we have to make sure that we have documented all the communication which are key or which are relevant, which has actually have helped us to arrive at our conclusion or closure of any financial item or financial matter. I think it is very important. And then abstract copies of certain records. So these are the documentation which are part of 230. Then we have 240, which is related to fraud inquiry. So what we have done to check the industry specific factors which are applicable to the client, which we are auditing. Documents on understanding of internal control process, how robust those processes are, what is the management override of control on those. Inquiries and communication with entities, employees, and management. I think the important is that this communication should be with the KMPs, and the process should be such that you are able to demonstrate that the people who have been interviewed in terms of fraud related questionnaire, they did not have the opportunity to corroborate their answers actually. So the answer should be independent. You should design your process in a manner that if you are interviewing the CFO, and maybe subsequently or before that you are interviewing the CEO, both should not be in a position to corroborate their answers. So, and then it will help you to assess the robustness of the process, and you will be able to corroborate with the answers, and then align them with the systems on the ground actually. So this is very important aspect, especially in the current environment. And then SA 250 this is about consideration of laws and regulations, and then you have to have a list of relevant legislation with various states, legislation, checklist of compliances for prevention and detection for non-compliances. So this may be specific to a client, this may be specific to industry, this may be specific to a state in which they are operating. So, and you have to be mindful of those regulations which are applicable. Next is SA 260, which is about communication with those charged with governance. This is not necessarily required to be documented unless some specific considerations, but I think you should be in a position to demonstrate that how you have communicated the key matters to those charged with governance, because if you are auditing a listed company and you are reporting on key audit matters, you have to demonstrate that how you have arrived at those key audit matters, which you found suitable to be included in the audit report, and how the filtration process has been completed. So in that process, it becomes important that you are able to demonstrate to the reviewer that how you have made a broader list of the key matters, and then how you have kind of ascertained which are most significant out of that. And these key matters, key audit matters, are those which are generally, or rather, most of the time, are communicated with those charged with governance. So if it is a listed company, then you probably can use your presentation which you are making to the audit committee to use as a base document to demonstrate that these were communicated. But they can be one-to-one meeting also with those charged with governance, and which can be form of the minutes or email communication and things like that. But I think this is it is not mandatory, but the way the entire audit process is structured, it is very important for you to be in a position to demonstrate that. And then communicating deficiencies in internal control to those charged with governance and management, and then obtaining reply for the same is required. So just communicating is one step, but what action they have, first they have acknowledged those deficiencies, and then second, they have fixed responsibility and then shared an action plan with you to bridge or to mitigate those control deficiencies in due process and due course of time. And that's very important to be documented. Then you have SA 299, which is joint audit of financial statement, which probably is not so, not so in practice in Indian market, Indian audit market, except for banks and insurance companies. But in some of the European markets, joint audit is mandatory for listed companies. But coming back to our own this thing. So there's a need for a clear bifurcation of scope and responsibility between the two auditors, and this has to be communicated to those charged with governance. And this allocation, because it's a long-term audit term, at least 5 years for each of the auditor, how those responsibilities have been interchanged, how those those scopes have been interchanged between the two firms, what is the process followed, and what are the documentation which are supporting that, and what is the company's objective around that. Actually, these are things which are important to be documented in the joint allocation of work. SA 300 is about planning and audit of financial statement. This is about audit strategy, updating audit plans, client acceptance, and previous auditor communications. 315 is about identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding an entity of its environment. This includes factors, operations, ownership, internal control, understanding, as well as documenting all these. Then 320 about materiality, which is the key aspect in an audit process, selection of samples, quantitative and qualitative factors for materiality. So this sampling is very important. How you have you used a stratification of the data, or then you have been able to identify the homogeneous population of the transaction, what sampling technique you have used, how you have ensured that each of the transaction get a equal chance of being selected in your sample and stuff like that. These are the things which are important and have to be documented in a very, I would say, specific manner to be able to demonstrate and substantiate your sampling process. Then SA 320 is about auditor's response to assess risk, then material misstatement addressed to management, and test of controls for its effectiveness. Moving on to, it's a long list, and I'm sorry it is a little boring, but very important in the current environment. 402 is about audit consideration relating to an entity using a service organization. This differs from service to service. Most of our clients are using service organization for their payroll management, for their IT management and things like that. So what are the process which have been used or put in place to make sure that those service organizations are also compliant or meeting the expectation of the control environment which has been put into place by the company. 450 is about evaluation of misstatements identified during the audit, needs to be documented with proper evaluation and conclusion. Then 501 is about audit evidence, very important, and then reliability of relevant test of evidence, non-conflict with other evidences on the same matter. So it's very important that in one conclusion you have used one evidence, and for some other conclusion you have used the same sample which is giving a contrary result. I think it's very important aspect. Then 505 about external confirmations. We all know that we need to float external confirmation to banks and selected customers and suppliers. I think more and more banks are using the technology these days, so they are coming on a platform which can help or expedite the process of confirmation, at least for the bank balance confirmation. Some of the banks, for instance, Citibank has mandated for all its customers that they would confirm balances only through confirmation.com, one of the tools which is available, and now it is owned by one of the international company. So, so more and more technology is coming to play, but the tendency in the Indian market is such that when you float confirmation for customers and suppliers, you receive very few responses, and then you have to do alternate procedure. So it's very important that when you have relying on the external confirmation and you don't receive enough, then what are the alternate process which you have done to get the comfort on those numbers? Very important to demonstrate, and that requires very specific documentation. Then 510 is an initial audit engagement, opening balances, very important. Recent financial statement, previous audit report. Maybe if there are certain items where you feel that just relying on the recent financial statement, previous audit report may not be enough, you can do an independent process of certain confirmation or external confirmation of certain balances, certain valuation procedures. So it is up to the situation and the judgment of the auditor that how elaborate these 510 procedures are to be planned. Then 520 analytical procedures. This includes comparison of information for prior period and significant fluctuations and data reliability. Then we have the next set of a standard, which is about audit sampling. I think I already talked about something on this: technical analysis for sample selection, substantive procedures, etc. 540 is on the accounting estimates, including fair value accounting estimates and related disclosures. Then management representation letter is a documentation substantiating that. 550 is a related party, very important, very critical standard, and so the audit process. List of parties, transactions with transactions entered, minutes book, identification of information provided by the management transactions, and then probably specific approval of the audit committee in case of listed companies and some certain classes of companies, whether there is a omnibus approval or there is a specific approval and things like that. Those things have to be documented. Then 560, subsequent events, adequate disclosures, representation from PCWG, very important. And then 570R, going concern, relevant factors of sustainability. More so this has gained momentum or more focus in the current environment of COVID, where the companies are struggling, to continue with their business operations in the manner in which they were doing earlier, pre-COVID era. So it is very important. 580, written representation is specifying each item disclosed in balance sheet. So this is also a very important document. It should be signed on the date of the balance sheet, actually, so that you make sure that all the representations are the current representations and they are not dated. Then you have 6110, which is using the work of internal auditors. So here you have to use a report and summary of internal audit report. Maybe you can also demonstrate that you have also analyzed the scope of internal auditor and the frequency of internal audit function and internal audit procedures. And if you want to, if you have suggested any changes, maybe to make it more robust, then you can demonstrate that also by way of certain minutes of meeting which you had with the internal auditors or maybe along with the management. 620 is using the work of an auditor's expert, then reliance and reliability of work performed. 710 is about comparative information, corresponding figures and comparative financial statement. This needs to be given and working paper to be maintained. 720 revises the auditor's responsibility relating to other information, which in case of listed companies, annual report, including MD&A, director's report, wherever the numbers are going. And then in case of private companies, it is a director report. So if you have been able to review that, or the director's report is being adopted or approved in the same meeting in which the financial statement are, then it is your obligation to review that and confirm that you have not observe any inconsistencies in the numbers or the financial information reported into these other reports, which are not necessary financial statement, and they are not inconsistent with your audited financial statement. So then SA 800 is about a special consideration, audit of financial statement prepared in accordance with the special purpose framework. So again, the key documentations could be engagement letter, purpose and intended users, which is very important. It's step to determine applicable framework by the management, and then factors having impact on information presented. So this is about 800, and then we have 805, which is a special consideration audits of single financial statement and specific elements of financial statement or item of financial statement. Then engagement letter should be robust enough, to make sure that you have included the scope and the responsibility in that. 810 is an engagement to report on summary financial statement. Again, the key documents are engagement letter, evaluation sheet, management criteria and its acceptance, audited financial statement, and comparative list of summaries. Now I'm moving to the the SQC one, which is more at the firm level and probably at at the broader perspective. So SQC1, which will be undergoing change, as we all know, all my professional colleagues are aware that there is a new standard which has been issued internationally, which will be applicable from December 22 globally, and ICI is also working on on the Indian version of those standards. These standards will replace SQC1, but at the moment, let's focus on SQC1. So the first and foremost is compliance with relevant ethical and independence requirements. So what are the policies which the firm has to demonstrate that they check the independence of all the audit staff partners periodically, annually? What is the process which has been put in place? What are the documentation which can support and substantiate that independence check has been done? If they're using an audit tool which associates independence confirmation by all the team members, then probably it is a good system, a good way to demonstrate. But it is not so, then they have to have a very robust system of paper documentation to demonstrate that. And then conclusion on compliance with independence requirement. Then we have acceptance and continuation of client relationship and audit engagement. This conclusion reached regarding the acceptance and continuance. So if you're accepting a new client, how you have done the risk assessment or risk analysis of audit risk involved to that, what are the background check of the promoters or the directors or the key management persons. Is there any specific news in the market about any specific business which the company is transacting? What analysis has been done, how it has been done, who has done it, how it has been documented, how the conclusion has been drawn, who was responsible to draw the conclusion, if there is a specific department or a risk manager or risk partner in the firm, and then how the facts were presented to that risk partner. Was there any committee formed to take the decision if it is a very risky client or large client? So all these things are important actually from a SQC1 perspective, which is one of the criteria for assessment in the audit maturity model also. Consultations, nature and scope and conclusions resulting from consultation undertaken during the audit engagement. So what is the consultation process? Is there any specific team or department where the consultations are? What is the process of consultation? Is the engagement team has to do their own analysis and then reach out to the technical team for the conclusion or the second view or their opinion on that, or they straight away send the query and then the technical department does it? What is the process which has been implemented by the, what is the turnaround time? Is it a written communication or even if it is done verbally, how we document that? Do we make the minutes of those discussions and both the parties who have participated in that discussion sign those minutes? So these are very important, aspects to demonstrate that consultation was kind of used in any audit engagement if it was necessary. How the partner or the engagement team was supported, maybe from an aspect which required broader assessment or broader analysis, requiring different lens at some point of time. And then difference of opinion, conclusion reached, documented and implemented. If there is a difference of opinion between the engagement team, engagement partner, and maybe the technical team, how that has been documented, and the conclusion, how that has been substantiated, what is the supporting argument for the final conclusion which has been kept or which has been decided. So these are very important aspects to be documented. Then the next is EQCR, which is engagement quality control, timing and procedure. Firms' policies and procedure on EQCR have been performed. So as we all know that for all listed companies, the EQCR is mandatory, but the firm may have policies which may be more robust to cover other categories of engagement also. EQCR has been completed on or before the date of the auditor's report. So you have to demonstrate two things, and the EQCR's involvement is not only during the completion of audit. I think technically speaking, EQCR should be part of all the key discussion, including the planning of the engagement. He does not, or he or she does not require to interact with the client, but he has to be in continuous engagement with the audit team. How that has been demonstrated, how that has been documented, and with how you document what exactly has been reviewed by EQCR and what are the results of those EQCR. If were there some action points out of the EQCR review, how they were addressed, did that require any change in the disclosure of or maybe any comment in the auditor report? All these things have to be demonstrated actually. If we have not documented these kind of procedures, then probably it will be very difficult to substantiate or demonstrate that these processes are done. Then a reviewer is not aware of any unresolved matter that would cause him to believe that significant judgment made by the engagement team and the conclusion thereon were not appropriate. Because if you have withheld any information from EQCR, which was critical, which was important, and then probably that would have changed the opinion or view of the EQCR, we should not be, landing in that kind of situation. Then documentation of consultation. This I've already talked about. So we can move on. Completion of assembly of final engagement files. This is important. Assembly of final engagement files to be completed on a timely basis after finalization of engagement reports. Law or regulation may prescribe such time limits for specific types of engagement. For example, for audit, such time limits is not more than 60 days after auditor's report date. And this documentation, what is the 60 days are for actually? I think there is a misconception many of the time that audit now, document later. That is not what for the 60 days are for. You have to document as you audit. But if you have created a document, let's say in a manuscript, or maybe a rough summary of your discussion with the management, and you want to replace it with a typed minutes, I think, I'm just giving an example, not necessarily this is the only example of completing the documentation, but audit documentation is to be completed while we are conducting the audit, and all the key documents should be in place, should be signed off, reviewed and signed off by partners, and before sign off of the financial statement on the date of on or before the date of the audit report. But some documentation which are which were maybe in a manual form, or maybe in a different form, which can be summarized later, those kind of activities can be done later, and for which 60 days time is given. Some of the companies, or some of the firms rather, are following a stricter internal timelines of 45 days, so that they don't miss that 60 days timeline. So what mechanism has been put in place by the firm to make sure that each partner is ensuring lockdown of files after 60 days are completed from the date of sign off, how that has been monitored, how this is being demonstrated, how the files are archived, how we make sure that once the file is archived, there is no changes possible in those audit documentation. And is there any mechanism to send signals or warnings or emails or alerts to partners after every 15 days or week that your deadline of 60 days is approaching, now you should close the file or lock down the file and things like that. So these are good practices and help the firm to demonstrate that the processes are robust and the documentation is in the perfect stage. Now we move on to the ownership and custody of documentation and retention of documentation. I think many a times it remains a debate that who is the owner of those documentation, because many a times client claim that these are their documents and they should be given access to that. So I will talk about briefly on that. And again, this is coming from ICAI peer review manual, which is a very detailed, robust document. Ownership is definitely with the auditor. The property, it is documents, audit documents are the property of the auditor, and auditors at their discretion, at his or her discretion, make available a portion or a extract or a summary of any audit work, audit documentation to its client, provided that such disclosure does not undermine the validity of the work. So this is about ownership and custody. And then retention of documentation is again governed by the regulation. So auditors are required to retain the working paper for a period to meet the needs of the practice and satisfy pertinent legal professional requirement, I think, which is 7 years as per SQC 1. And audit documentation not to be deleted after completion of documentation, but we can add information to that actually. So I think, what does this mean actually? Let's say if you have come across certain information which is subsequent to completion of audit, I'm not talking about subsequent event, but maybe certain document which may be relevant and which may help the reader or the reviewer to correlate, the situation then at the time of audit and subsequent. Certain documentation can be added to the documentation, of course, within the time frame of those 60 days, not beyond that. You can't open the file after the file is locked down. So this is about retention of documentation. The next section is about these are the proposed changes to SQC1, which will be replaced by ISQM1. Internationally, as I mentioned, this standard will come into play or will become applicable from 15 December 22. So ISQC1, which is known as SQC1 in India, would be replaced by ISQM1 globally and SQM1 in India. ISQM1 is a more robust standard which will promote more proactive, scalable, and effective approach to quality management. So it is not only making sure that audit quality is at it as the best level, but what are the systems and processes and mechanisms which have been put in place by the firm to monitor the quality actually. So for each partner, if there is an independent team which are monitoring the quality of audit performed by each partner, so how those systems have been put in place, how effective those are, how you are evaluating the performance of the person who is operationally responsible for controlling the quality at the audit firm or for the audit engagement. So these are the things which are being introduced by this new standard. Correspondingly, sooner or later, AASB or ICI has formed study groups to work on the drafts for of these standards to meet the Indian environment, and that study group is presently in process of making these drafts for the consideration of the Accounting Standard Board. And these will be applicable, if not maybe by 15 December. That is the timeline for the international, and it has to be, the AASB will take a call when they will might like to make it applicable in India, probably from the same date or maybe sooner or later than that date. So we'll come to know in due course of time. And then we have the new standard includes enhanced documentation requirement to a very large extent. So, so this is very important. Some of us are still struggling with the existing requirement, and this standard is going to take the level of documentation maybe to the next level, which I may not give any measure in terms of quantity 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, but it is much more than what we presently need. So we have to gear up to make sure that we meet the existing requirement. And because in 2 years' time, we have to be able to meet the expectation of the new standard. Then I'm moving to the specific regulatory requirement, which I mentioned in my initial slide, which is coming from SEBI for listed companies, RBI for banking companies, and NBFCs, recent regulation which I have brought in by the RBI, and IRDAI for insurance companies. Regulators might have a specific documentation requirement for different types of engagement. LODR contains specific guidance on preservation of documentation. So the listed company shall have a policy of preserving documents approved by the board in at least 2 categories as follows: documents whose preservation shall be permanent in nature, and document which preservation period of not less than 8 years after completion of the relevant transaction, provided that listed entity may keep documents specified in clause A and B in electronic mode. So that flexibility is available, but certain documents are permanent in nature and certain documents are to be preserved for at least 8 years. Then you have, I think this is very important, very contemporary. We have all struggled during the last 1.5 years with the COVID situation, and we have come a long way to deal with the current situation and be in a situation to complete our audit with the same level of quality. So this standard has given globally this has impacted the businesses, and so do audit actually. So considering the various accounting disclosure, internal control, auditing implication, ICI had issued a set of various publications in the form of advisory containing detailed guidance on auditing procedures to be performed to obtain audit documentation, which includes ICI accounting and auditing advisory. Going concern, key consideration for auditors amid COVID-19, which I touched base while I was explaining the requirement of this relevant standard. physical inventory, because it has been challenging for all of us. Last year also in March 20, when when the lockdown was imposed from 24th of March, so it was practically impossible for most of us to perform any physical verification. So we had to do alternate procedure or a subsequent count and then roll back, or maybe any count which we have done earlier sometime in December during the quarterly closing or interim closing, and then roll forward and things like that, or many other alternate procedure. There was a detailed guidelines which were issued by the, and I think this remained challenging in the current year also, when toward the end of March the second wave came, and that distorted the whole business community. And then auditors reporting on key audit consideration amid COVID-19. The pandemic is not yet over, as we all know. Hence, together the other guidance, the guidance regarding extended documentation contained in these guidelines comes very handy, and this will continue to apply as new normal in future as well. That's how I feel, and I'm sure my colleagues will have the same feeling. This is briefly about some findings which the Institute through various boards have been able to compile on the lack of documentation which they have experienced in the quality review or the peer review or quality review procedures of the firms and engagements. So we all know that we have different bodies for maintaining or monitoring the quality of audits which are performed by each firm. These includes peer review. This is a review of practice unit by their peers, and then quality review, which Sandeep covered. This was earlier covering the listed client, but now the NFRA coming into play, that role will be played by NFRA. But other critical engagement other than listed will still be the responsibility of quality review board. And then financial reporting review, which is an oversight body for all the overall quality management. So some of these bodies issued the review report for public consideration, which are in public domain. So I will just quickly glance through some of the observations which have been contained in this report. So one of the finding was that the standard on quality control, SQC1, the firm's quality control policies and procedures were neither documented nor communicated to the firm's personnel. So I think this is a very serious observation. Even if you have best of the process in place, but if you have not documented them and you have not communicated them to your audit the team members or audit staff, then it is very difficult for you to prove that these procedures were actually in place, and they were in practice, and they were implemented, and they were continuously in use, be it independence or ethical requirements and things like that. So, some of the firms were found to be lacking on this aspect. And then second finding was quality control for an audit of financial statement, not keeping documentation with respect to appropriate procedures regarding acceptance and continuous of client relationship and audit engagement. I think we have touched upon all these aspects in my previous slide. And here you see that some of the firms or some of the auditors have not been able to found meeting the expectation of the quality reviewer on these counts. Then audit documentation, SA 230. This included proper documentation providing a sufficient and appropriate record of the basis for the auditor's report was not prepared. Checklist for compliance of essays and applicable legal and regulatory requirements were missing. I think you must have seen, these are critical documents under each of these standards which we covered earlier. The reference of working papers was missing in AS and NDS and CARO checklist. Following were not documented properly, like details of litigation and audit file, who performed the audit work. So these are the questions which were there on the very first slide: who, what, why, when, which. So who performed the audit work? This was not evidence, and this was not documented. Date on which such work was performed, and sorry. Then you have evidence document for reporting on internal financial control over financial reporting. There was lack of documentation there also, and copies of branch auditors report. These were not documented. in some of the by some of the auditors. Then you have auditors responsible with respect to fraud, which I just touched base in my previous slide. So not making or documenting the inquiries of management and others to determine if they have knowledge about any actual suspected or alleged fraud. You can't be you can't be assuming or presumptive on these things. First, you have to perform procedures which are defined into the standard, and then you have to document them as well, so that you can demonstrate that these were already performed. And your decision or conclusion on this aspect, which has to be reported into our report, including Caro, has been well substantiated by a adequate audit procedure. And then audit procedure for assessing the risk of material misstatement due to fraud or error as per SA 240. I think this was not documented in some of the engagement which were reviewed by these boards and these authorities. Planning of audit and financial statement, establishing an overall audit strategy that guides the development of audit plan was not documented. Nature, timing, extent of planned risk assessment procedure were not documented. Identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement 315, not performing and documenting risk assessment procedure to provide a basis for identification and assessment of risk of material misstatement at the financial statement and assertion level. The files or the firms were found to be lacking on this aspect in some of the cases. Then we have materiality in planning and performing the audit. Overall audit materiality for the financial statement as a whole and computation of the same was not documented. Even if that was the basis, but since it was not documented, it was not, it was not an acceptable kind of situation because you can't substantiate what you have done, whether this was enough or this was adequate to get the comfort on the financial statement and give opinion. Then auditors respond to assess risk, SA 330, the following were not documented. Design and implementation of overall responses to address the assess risk of material misstatement at the financial statement level. Design and performance of test of controls was not documented. Evaluation of misstatement and identified during the audit for 440, the misstatement accumulated during the audit was not documented, whether they have been corrected, an auditor's conclusion as to whether the same are material and basis of such conclusions. Because we all know, even the maturest environment using all the technology, SAP, or there are certain adjustment which might come up, which you might come across during the audit. They may not be material, but how you have dealt with them, how you are you in a position to demonstrate that these misstatement or adjustment were not material? Have these been communicated? Has any action been taken by the management to make sure that these are not recurring in the next audit or in the next period to be covered under audit and things like that? These are important aspects to be documented and demonstrated. Then external confirmation documentation was not kept for external confirmation procedure in accordance with SA 505. Initial audit engagement opening balances, audit procedures performed for obtaining comfort on that, whether the opening balances contain misstatement were not documented. Not keeping documentation for performing analytical procedure near the end of the audit. So probably there are two stages. One is preliminary audit analysis, and then at the time of completion. So the completion audit analysis was not performed, or at least it was not documented. Audit sampling. There was no audit documentation with respect to following to substantiate that the sampling procedure performed was in accordance with SA 530. And items for the sample were selected in such a way that each sampling unit in the population had a chance of selection. So there was no bias in selection of audit procedure. In selection of sample has to be demonstrated. Then the next is on the audit accounting estimates and related disclosures, SA 540, no documentation with respect to review of the judgments and decision made by the management. The basis for auditor's conclusion about the reasonableness of accounting estimate and their disclosures were not documented properly. Related parties, transaction, performance of audit procedures to identify the risk of material misstatement were not documented. And then auditor's responsibility relating to other information, SA 220, procedure performed by the auditor as per SA 220 that has read the other information to identify material inconsistencies with the audit financial statement were not documented. properly. You are supposed to obtain the draft audit report and then probably read through and make notings and then make a memo out of it that you have read this and you did not observe inconsistencies, and all these have to be documented over the emails when you have received the draft report and stuff like that, it was done in time and things like that. So there were lapses on that front. How the world is moving towards more robust documentation requirements. So I think the key is embrace standardization. So if your working papers, if your work papers, if your audit reports, if your consultation, process, they're all, defined, they are supported by standard templates, then probably there is a likelihood of being in a situation of inadequate documentation is little less. So embrace standardization. Document now, this is the key, this is the message, document now and save time later. Instead of thinking that let's complete the audit and we will document later, that will not help, and that will may put you and will put you into a difficult situation. So it is completely not recommended. And be prepared what is ahead. So you should be mindful of the risk in the audit, and what kind of question which might come. You must be seeing the current environment. The regulator, the first scapegoat for any misdoing in the corporate world is the finger is pointed towards the auditor. Then in this kind of situation, how you defend yourself, I think it is very important, and that will only a proper documentation of your audit procedure and audit conclusion will only help you to deal with that kind of situation. Then a quick recap. So we talked about importance of audit documentation, then factors of form and content of documentation, the stages of documentation, key essential of documentation, requirement from respective essays, which is very critical, and that we cover in the subsequent slide also. And then we have talked about requirement from SQC1, which will be drastically changed by the new standard. Ownership and retention of documentation, we touch base on this. Proposed changes in SQC1, which will be brought in by SQM1 and SQM2. Changes in documentation requirement due to pandemic, very important, and then factual findings and international practices. I have, before we get into the question answers, because this will not allow us to have an interactive session with all of you, but I have framed certain questions actually to see how attentive we were into this discussion, and we all have understood or taken the message, which I'm sure we were already aware of, but it is just reminding ourselves in this current environment and making sure that we are geared up to meet the requirement of the new standard, new regulatory environment or expectation, which are building up, and not only in India, but globally as well. So which of the following factors may affect the form, content, and extent of audit documentation, whether it is size of complexity of the audit, or it is records maintained by the client, or it is A and B, or it is A or B. So the answer is A and B. Both are playing a key role in making sure that the extent and content of audit documentation is driven by these two factors. The second question is about auditor is bound to provide the copies of the working papers to the CEO of the company. This is about ownership of the document, which we touched base. So what the answer should be true or false? I think the answer definitely is false, because you do not have any obligation. But at your discretion, you may decide to give any extract or any portion of your documentation. But you have no obligation to share your work paper with either CEO or with the company management. Then the next question is, which of the following is required to be documented? Communication with TCWG, communication with internal auditor, A and B both. Yes, that's what we discussed. In case of audit, the assembly of the final engagement file should be completed within how many days? We all know that the requirement is 60 days. Some of the companies are following internal robust requirements, so they make sure that they don't miss the regulatory or the statutory requirement of 60 days. Then each audit work paper file should contain which of the following information: initials of the member of the audit team who prepared, the date on which the document was prepared, or initials of the member of the audit team who reviewed the working paper. The answer is both. So we have to have both the documents in place to make sure that who has initialed and when it has been done, who has reviewed the file. Then the next question is the auditor required to document the materiality level. I'm sure we all know the answer. No, it is just calculated and considered by the auditor for his audit. Yes, as per 320 audit materiality, it is required to be calculated and documented. The answer, of course, is B. ISQC 1 would get replaced by IOSQM 1 with effect from globally. We all know it is 22. So that's what the date is. In India, either we'll have the same date or we'll have a different date, which will come to know in due course of time. As per SQC 1 are the consultation undertaking during the audit engagement. Are also required to be documented. The answer is yes. And then as per SEBI LODR regulation, what is the time limit or time frame for keeping the documentation by the companies? Is it at least 10 years after completion of the relevant documentation, or it is 8 years? The answer is 8, as we know. But certain documents are permanent documents which are safe for all times to come. So, but this is about specific documents which are to be preserved for the period. And then the next question is about obtaining the document containing the list of related party transactions covered under the scope of which of the following assets. We all know, but just to remind ourselves, this is covered by SA 550. Then audit documentation is the record of audit procedure performed, audit evidence obtained, conclusion or reached by the auditor, all of the above. I think we all know the answer. It is all of the above for sure. Documentation with respect to conclusion reached in case of difference of opinion, as we discussed during the consultation process, and implementation thereof is governed by which of the following standards: SQC 1, standard on quality control, or SA 230. This is audit documentation. The answer is SQC 1 because this talks about consultation process. And then the next question is audit documentation is the property of the auditee. The answer is true or false. The answer is false because this was covered in another question also, whether we have an obligation to share our work paper with the CEO of the company. The answer was no, and that's why it is not their property and it is our discretion whether we would like to share or not. The EQCR is required to be completed on or before the date of the audit report, after the date of the audit report. We all know the answer. The answer is A. It has to be completed on or before the date of audit report because that's a process which is to be completed either simultaneously or prior to issue of audit report. It can't be done subsequently. Because in that case, you will be missing to demonstrate that EQCR agreed with the conclusion which were drawn by the engagement team and then the engagement partner, if the process has not been completed on time. Then you have any additional information can be added in the audit documentation after the documentation is complete. True or false? The answer is true. Is it possible to delete, discard audit documentation after the documentation date? The answer we all know is no. No, it is not possible or not allowed to delete the document after the completion of the audit. And which of the following standards in auditing issued by ICAI deals with audit documentation? SA 320, SA 230, or SA 250? The answer is SA 230. Which of the following is not the best practice for audit documentation? Document later, save time now, or be prepared for what is ahead? Of course, document later, save time now is not a good practice and we should avoid that. I'm sure most of us are aligned with this thought, and they are doing the same. SQC1 will be replaced by ISQC1, ISQM1, SQM1. This is a tricky question. ISQM1 is the international name. For us, it will be SQM1. So it was the easier one. And then last, probably this is the last question. Documentation requirements are governed only by the essays issued by the ICAI. The answer is fall, because some of the regulators are also, giving their requirement for documentation with the specific classes of company governed by them. So that is all from my side. Thank you so for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any question which you may have. Though I have taken exactly 1 hour, so I think we have enough time for question and answer. Thank you so much. Please, I'll be happy to answer any question. Anilji, you can take over, maybe.
Am I audible, sir?
You are now audible, sir.
Now I am audible, sir?
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Sir, it was wonderful deliberation, and the way you have explained all the methods as well as the way of the audit documentation, and at last you have elaborated your whole deliberation with a view check and just recapitulated our pandas and this audit documentation. Thank you so much, sir. We have 2-3 questions also.
Yeah.
So it is relating to the internal control. One question is from the member. He's saying, while evaluating internal control, and the auditor is just aware of the glaring of the fraud not reported or made aware of him or her, what should the statutory auditor do in that case?
Okay, so I think there is a requirement, if you have identified in during your audit procedure any presence of fraud or any fraudulent transaction, and I'm sure if it is material, then you have an obligation to share it with those charged with governance and bring it to the attention of those charged with governance if it has not been already brought to their attention, and give them enough time to respond to it. And with that response, you have an obligation to report to the regulator also. So that's where
Yes,
all this depends on the materiality. If you feel that the transaction or the fraud in transaction is quite significant, and that might.
Yes, sir. So you are on mute now.
So I don't know whether I was audible at any point of time or no.
No. Yeah, now you are audible, sir.
Okay, fine.
Now there is another question. Can the auditing standards be used while performing internal audit and vice versa?
I think there is a different set of a standard being issued for internal audit, actually. I'm sure some of them are still recommendatory, but the institute is doing a good job to issue standards separately for internal audit. But certain standards which are useful, you can use it, but you may not be in a position to advise the client that why these are necessary, why you're using it. And this was the case with auditing standards also, till the time they were made mandatory as per the Companies Act. Otherwise, they were saying that we have no obligation to respond to your auditing standard. So you might face that challenge, but if you feel some of the standards are relevant, you can use them. But as I understand, there is a separate set of a standard being issued for internal audit.
One suggestion one member is seeking is asking about some audit documentation software which compiles with all the requirements for a small medium type proprietary firm.
I think Institute has taken some initiative on that.
Yes, we have already taken. Yes.
So I think there is a shortlisting of vendor has been done, or is in the process. I think Institute
Yes, sir.
will definitely come out with some tool which will be useful for all size
Yes,
firms,
sir.
I would say, for
Yes, sir.
for
Yes.
sure for small and mid size, and we'll have that opportunity to use that tool to bring the standardization of the audit processes for the fraternity as a whole.
Yes, sir. Yes. So these were 2-3 questions for your deliberation, sir. On behalf of Committee for Members in Practice of Institute of Chartered Accountant, I extend my heartiest thanks for sparing your valuable time and enlightening all of us on various intricacies on audit documentation. Thank you so much, sir.
It is always good to connect with the fellow colleagues. So
Yes, sir.
though it is a virtual environment, I would love to go back to the normal days when we can see all
Yes,
of
sir.
you.
Yes, yes, sir.
Thank you for this opportunity, and it was pleasure to be a part of this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. My heartiest thanks to both these speakers, sir. Thank you. Thank you.